Hi you guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm starting seeds today and I'm going to bring you guys along with me for this process. Now I do already have some seeds started, things like onions and celery that I need to get going pretty early on in the season, and my main focus today is going to be on tomatoes and peppers. Now this is quite a bit earlier than I would typically start these things. Our estimated last frost date is about May 8th, and I typically don't plant tomatoes out until about the third week of May, peppers around there, or even a little bit after that. But my hope is with getting them going early inside, we'll get a harvest coming in from the garden a little bit sooner. It does also mean that I'm likely going to have to up-pot these, which is something that I typically try to avoid. However, I think it might be worth the extra effort. We're going to find out this year. Now, if you are looking for a channel here on YouTube with educational garden content, I promise that this is not it. I'm just going to share my process with you. I'm by no means an expert. I kind of am a fly-by-the-seat-of-my-pants gardener. I'm making things up as I go, loosely following a plan, and I often ignore rules, and things work out most of the time. So take that for what it is, and I'm just going to turn on an audiobook and plug away at this, and I'll share with you a little bit of our garden plans this year and what I am starting. Throughout seed starting season, I always have a Rubbermaid bin filled with either seed starting mix or just potting soil. Half the time that is what I end up using, and I don't even bother sifting it, and it works just fine. And I just have a little bit of water that I've added in there to moisten it a bit. And as for seed starting containers, I really like the pots from Bootstrap Farmer. They're a little bit more expensive, but I will have these forever. I've got them in a couple different sizes, and they have held up really, really well over the past few years. So I definitely think it's worth the little bit of extra money that I paid for those. They're gonna last us a long time. I will link below where I get them in Canada. I'm not sure if Bootstrap Farmer, ordering from their website, they'll ship directly to you, or if you'd potentially have to pay duty, but there is a gardening store in Ontario that I ordered them from. As I mentioned earlier, most of what I'm starting today is tomatoes and peppers. I've already started onions, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, celery, all that sort of thing. And I am going to be starting a little bit of flowers today. Not a whole lot. I am a very low maintenance gardener. I don't grow a lot of flowers. I typically will grow some Cosmos and some Zinnias, anything that I can kind of just scatter the seeds for and I don't have to put a ton of effort into, but I am going to be starting a few flowers this year. So the Apple Blossom Snapdragons I wanted to try from West Coast Seeds just because they were super pretty. I'm also starting some delphiniums and some foxgloves, as well as a couple varieties of violas that I like to just have in pots out back. We'll see if all of these even make it into the garden this year, but I did want to start a bit that I can potentially add in. I know that for me, this year in particular is going to be really busy with work and just other commitments, so I don't want to kind of overwhelm myself too much. And at the end of the day, I'm ultimately going for function over beauty, but it really is nice to have some flowers thrown in there as well. Now, I would say about 90% of my seeds come from West Coast Seeds. I know some of you are in BC, which is really cool, and so if you do any gardening at all, I'm sure you're familiar with them. I also will buy seeds from some small local companies, and then I do have a few varieties that I order from Baker Creek. Not a whole lot, but there's a couple tomato varieties that I really like from them, and because of that, I've just kind of picked up a few other packets from them as well, but the bulk comes from West Coast Seeds. If you're interested, I'll be sure to leave in the description box down below some of my favorite varieties from these companies, just so you can have that to go and reference. Over the past few years, I've really figured out what is and isn't worth growing for me. It's really not worthwhile to have tomatillos. I can just use any leftover green tomatoes for salsa verde, and that works great. It's a great way to use them up, and it saves me garden space. And then winter squash is something that I don't really grow a whole lot of anymore. I used to grow quite a bit, but the reality is my husband's not a huge fan of squash, and I can get it for pretty inexpensive from local farms. We're really lucky where we live. We've got a lot of awesome organic local farms, some of which deliver, so you really can't go wrong with that. This year I'm really trying to scale back what I'm growing as far as varieties go. I have a tendency to want to start a ton of different plants, and I'll just do one of each, and sometimes that works out for certain things. Other things, sometimes it can kind of make it harder to utilize them when I go to preserve them. But for tomatoes, I've kind of narrowed down which varieties do really well for us, and one of those is Dr. Wyche's, which is why I originally ordered from Baker Creek, because I couldn't find a Canadian source. And with that, as I mentioned earlier, I have just kind of picked up some other items from Baker Creek as well. But these ones in particular grow super, super well for us, so it's always going to be a staple. I have some beefsteak and cherry varieties from local companies that I am growing this year. I'm going to be doing some San Marzano and some Amish Paste tomatoes. As always, those are kind of a staple for canning, and I always get those from West Coast Seeds. And then, as I mentioned, the Dr. Wyche's, I'm going to do probably 6 plants of those this year. A couple of the Thorburn's Terracotta, I love the flavor of those, and those tend to grow pretty well for us as well. And I always grow just a single plant of the Brad's Atomic Grape tomatoes from Baker Creek. I don't think that they have the best flavor, but they're really cool looking. And last time I ordered from Baker Creek, I got this packet of spoon tomatoes for free. If you haven't seen these before, they are super tiny little tomatoes, and the plants are really prolific. They're great for things like salad or just for snacking on, and so I think one of those is something that I'm always going to be growing as well. Peppers are another place where I'm trying to scale back on varieties this year. There are so many fun varieties to grow, but I don't need a ton of hot peppers this year. We still have lots of hot sauce in our canning room, and so my main focus this year is going to be on bell peppers. We'll do lots of jalapenos still for salsa, some shishito peppers, and then banana peppers, and that is about it for us this year. For bell peppers, I've been growing the past few years both King of the North and California Wonder, and I haven't figured out if one produces better than the other. I always at the beginning of the season say that that's something I'm going to keep better track of, but it hasn't happened yet. So I'm doing a mix of both of those. For jalapenos, my favorite variety to grow are the black Magic Jalapeños from West Coast Seeds, but I do have a few varieties that were just sort of fun that I got from Baker Creek, and I honestly probably won't order these again. They just don't do very well for us. But they are the lemon spice, the orange spice, and the pumpkin spice jalapenos. But I do like to have them because it just adds a little bit of color to things like my pickled jalapeno jars. It's nice to have that variety, but I just don't find them to be super prolific for us. For the sake of this video, I was starting seeds in the dining room just because it's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing and has better lighting, but I keep all of the starts down in the basement. So I have just a wire shelving unit, and then my husband set up the grow lights for me. So for the top shelf of it, we have a grow light that I can adjust up and down, and then for the starts that are on the lower shelves, the light is attached to the shelf above it, and then I can just prop the trays up as needed. That's all for seed starting today. I'll have more to start in a few weeks, but at this point, the bulk of what I'm starting is done. So that feels really great, and I'm looking forward to garden season. So if you have anything that you're really excited about growing, I'd love to hear from you, and I'll be sure to leave some of the companies that I purchase from in the description box down below if you're interested in checking them out, or if you're interested to see some of my favorite varieties. I'll see you in the next video.